previous slide?
These ones in the previous slide, or they were 1? See, for the thermal field, this was 1, and there were some verified things. So you can compute these things, and it's 1 in one case, and it's exponentially so in the other case. Okay, now you can do other examples. For example, here's what we call the microcanonical double state. The microcanonical double state is not a state that's often considered, but you could consider it. It corresponds to taking the two CFTs and entangling them in a microcanonical ensemble, not in a thermal ensemble. So you take eigenstate in the left, eigenstate in the right, and entangle them with no factor of e to the minus beta e, but in some limited set of energy eigenstates. And I think a limit where the width of this microcanonical ensemble is much smaller than so beta delta is much smaller than 1. And you can once again do this, and this leads to what we call a low band pass wormhole. And so what the low band pass wormhole means is if you look at low frequencies, which are very small compared to delta, then the modes are seen by the right observer almost like the left modes. But if you look at very high frequencies, then these modes are almost uncorrelated. Okay? So you can do this computation. Here's a cartoon that corresponds to this. I want to emphasize this is a cartoon. But the cartoon is as follows. You see, you have these wormholes, and there's some length, some wormhole or some finite length. Now, if you have a very low frequency wave, then the low frequency wave can basically jump over this. It doesn't care that that there's a long wormhole. So if the observer on the left sends a low frequency excitation or a long wavelength excitation, he can affect the observer on the right. But if you have a high frequency excitation, it falls into the singularity and doesn't reach the observer on the right. Okay, so this is a cartoon of the kind of solution that you might expect. In this situation, actually, you might be able to get a better geometric, a more precise geometric description. In fact, there are solutions of this kind. They're called these Janus solutions. But they don't have the right properties to be dual to this microcanonical double state because they don't have boost invariance. They involve throwing in matter from both sides. So you have to support this wormhole using matter. But in principle, you might try and ask what is the geometric dual to this microcanonical double state. And it's a well-defined question. We don't know the answer, but whatever it is, it's roughly like this cartoon.
What makes you think it's a vacuum solution?
I beg your pardon?
What makes you think it's a vacuum solution?
It's the fact that it has boost invariance. It's the fact that you can act with e to the I HL minus HR, and that leaves the state invariant. So it has boost invariance.
That's.
So it could, but these Janus solutions don't have boost invariance.
I know. I'm not asking about the Janus solution.
Okay, so
what makes you think it's a vacuum?
No, it doesn't have to be a vacuum solution, but it's something that has to have boost invariance.
I know. But
okay, so that's all. It's something that has to have boost invariance, which is Janus solution too. So if you can find a solution that has boost invariance, that would be a candidate which would be good. So it has this long wormhole problem.
But a solution to not just the Einstein equation, the vacuum Einstein equations.
That's fine. It could have some matter as long as it has a boost invariance.
Okay.
But the Janus solutions don't have boost invariance. So they have this property of having a long wormhole, but they don't have the boost invariance. So you want something with boost invariance. Okay, good. So now you can play some more games with this. One of them is actually a test of linearity. It's a question that people asked some time back. How is this state dependence is something unusual, and can the infalling observer actually detect the state dependence? And you can, in fact, you can use this description we have for weak state systems to check this. And the way you do this is as follows. Now, if you want to detect, there were these proposals for nonlinear quantum mechanics that Weinberg and so on made. And various people, Gisin and in fact Koczynski, long time back, 1990. Developed tests to see how this nonlinear quantum mechanics would be inconsistent with the ordinary experiments that we do. And these tests basically involve taking the system and entangling it with some set of qubits. And what happens is if you take the system and you entangle it with some set of qubits, and you have some nonlinear evolution of the state, typically what will happen is that even if you do an evolution only on this system, the density matrix of the spins will change. You see, usually if you have one system entangled with some other spins, and you do a unitary on that system, the density matrix of the spins doesn't change. But if you have nonlinear quantum mechanics, it does. And this is the classic test of linearity which these people developed. Okay, so you can check. So you take the CFT, you entangle it with some spins. Now you jump into the horizon, you act with some unitary, and then if the observer who's sitting outside the CFT and looking at his qubits sees a change in his density matrix, then he knows that you're using nonlinear quantum mechanics, and that would be bad. But in fact, our system is not of this kind. You can check, you can do this experiment, and for our case, in fact, the density matrix of the spins doesn't change. So as long as the spins don't have an entanglement entropy which scales with the entropy of the black hole with n squared. If they do, then of course then you get the pictures and you get a wormhole. But as long as they don't have that, in fact the density matrix of the space doesn't change. And there's a physical implication of this, which is that state dependence is completely invisible to the infalling observer within effective field theory. And this is a very important consistency check for state dependence, which is that the infalling observer should not, by means of any simple experiment, be able to detect the state dependence of this variable cities using. Now there may be some secret description in the boundary which is state dependent, but the infalling observer should just see ordinary quantum mechanics, and this is an important test of that. Okay, so running a little behind time. Let me go very fast to the semi-classical state dependence because I want to talk about some new problems. Sorry, so anyway, let me go. I'll be fast in the semi-classical origins. So I want to go back to these time-shifted states that I wrote there, and I want to remind you. Yesterday we discussed how these time-shifted states correspond to the action of a large diffeomorphism on the eternal black hole. And as I said earlier, we know that on each such geometry, you know what these tilde modes are. They correspond to left modes, but left modes which are shifted by this time. So you have that understanding. Now, if you have, so we have a set of geometries, and we know what the mirror modes are in each geometry. There's a standard procedure of semi-classical quantization, which one might think you could apply to this. So each time-shifted state that you have is a point on the phase space of gravity because it's a solution to the equations of motion, and solutions to the equations of motion are in one-to-one correspondence in the phase space. And on every point in the phase space, you understand what the local degrees of freedom are. There are some shifted modes on the left. And the question is, if you understand some function on every point in the phase space, if you know what the degrees of freedom are at every point in the phase space, you can usually lift that to an operator in the quantum theory. And the way that's done is usually by means of what's called coherent state quantization, which means that you're given some function on phase space, you can lift it to an operator in the full Hilbert space by means of some coherent state quantization of this kind. So you have some coherent states, these time-shifted solutions are all like coherent states, and you can take these coherent states and take this function f of z and lift it to an operator that now has the property that when it's inserted back in any of these coherent states, it evaluates to this function f of z. So this is the standard procedure for coherent state quantization. But the problem is that this procedure fails in this case of gravity for an interesting reason. You see, usually this procedure succeeds because coherent states have a certain inner product. They overcompete, but they have an inner product which dies off and keeps dying off to zero. Now, if you look at these solutions that we have in gravity, these psi t solution states that we have, you can ask what their inner product with the original thermofield double state is. And for very small t, if you take this t on that board to be a small number, then this inner product, it's a CFT computation by the way to compute this inner product, turns out to go down as e to the minus ct squared, which is very similar to this expression, and this c is a specific heat of the CFT, as I said. But if you take this t to be very large, then this inner product gets a fat tail, so it becomes e to the minus s by 2. Okay? So this inner product doesn't go all the way down to zero like the coherent state approximation, like the coherent state inner products do, but it in fact gets a fat tail. So if you look at the semi-classical expression, is this blue curve, but it goes down very fast, and the exact expression is this yellow curve, which gets a fat tail and stays on top of the blue curve. So there's this funny property. So if you look at the states in the CFT that correspond to classical solutions in gravity, then the states in the CFT have an inner product that's somewhat different from what you would compute from the gravitational semi-classical analysis. And in particular, they have this fat tail. This is just a CFT statement, and it's this fat tail that I claim prevents you from defining operators globally on all solutions. It is this fat tail which gives you an obstruction to try to define these operators everywhere in the phase space. So there's a slogan that goes along with this, which is that coherent states are always overcomplete, but usually that's okay. If I give you a good semi-classical physical variable, you can still lift that to a simple operator in the Hilbert space. But the CFT states that correspond to well-defined geometries are even more overcomplete than coherent states are. And this is the reason that what you think is a well-defined semi-classical degree of freedom, which is what is the local field operator is measured at some point, you might think that's a well-defined semi-classical degree of freedom. And usually well-defined semi-classical degrees of freedom are given by linear operators in the Hilbert space everywhere. But that relies on the fact that while coherent states are overcomplete, they're not too overcomplete. But I'm claiming, and it's a fact about the CFT, that the CFT states dual to well-defined geometries are even more overcomplete. And and that gives you an obstruction to answering well-defined semi-classical questions by means of a global linear operator on the Hilbert space. So we can discuss this more, but this is roughly the semi-classical intuition of why I think this state dependence arises as a property of local operators. Okay, good. So now I want to talk about some recent puzzles. Let me spend 10 minutes talking about some recent puzzles.
What exactly do you mean by overcomplete? They're not orthogonal, but they are a basis. So,
well, okay. What I mean precisely is this statement. I mean, this is once again it's a statement that you look at this inner product. The inner product for these coherent states dies off.
But orthogonal isn't non-orthogonal isn't.
Well, the thing. Coherent states give you some complex representation. So in general, if you give me the diagonal expectation values of some operator on coherent states, that's enough to totally specify the operator. It's in that sense that these coherent states are overcomplete. Now, usually, if you give me the diagonal expectation values of an operator on a basis, on a non-overcomplete basis, that's not enough to completely specify the operator. But operators which have nice properties are completely specified by giving diagonal expectation values of coherent states. But these guys are,
I mean, I'm still a little confused. I mean, you're trying to make a counting argument.
I beg your pardon?
I mean, you're making a counting argument.
Actually, can I say that the point is not about, we can discuss I think the overcompleteness is precisely expressed in terms of this, but the point I want to make, which is here, is that the inner product between states in the CFT that correspond to well-defined classical geometries does not have the property that it dies off to 0 as fast as you would like for semi-classical geometry.
Okay,
That's a well-defined statement. We can discuss the overcompleteness, which I think is this, but it's not germane to the point of it. Okay, good. So now, recently Maral from Kolchinsky described some new paradox, and so I'll discuss that, and I left it for the end because, as I say, I don't have a complete solution. And this new paradox doesn't rely implicitly on taking a trace, which is what a lot of these old paradoxes did. And so this was and therefore, it's not automatically resolved by state dependence. Let me describe what the new paradox is. The new paradox is as follows. I take a black hole, okay? So take a black hole, and let's say you take a black hole with an empty interior. So there's some matter deep inside, so there's a horizon. And now I'm going to add a configuration where I take the black hole and I add a shell of matter just outside the black hole horizon. Okay? So you have an ultra-relativistic shell of matter which lives just outside the black hole horizon. You can check in many ways, but here's a heuristic way to check. If you compute the binding energy of this shell with the black hole, just using standard formulas, this completely cancels off the kinetic energy of the shell. So even though the shell is kinetic and the rest energy, even though the shell is a shell which has a lot of local energy, it's expanding almost at the speed of light. That's why it's managing to live just outside the horizon, because it's expanding almost at the speed of light. And it's a very energetic shell locally. The global energy that it adds is very small, and that's because it has some binding energy with the black hole, which is negative, and that totally cancels off the kinetic and rest energy of the shell itself. And therefore, there's a precise way to do this calculation, of course, which is to add this configuration and compare the ADM energy of the new configuration with the old configuration. But because this is the case, Maral from Kolchinsky suggested that there are as many states with firewalls as there are states with a smooth interior. Because for every state of a given energy with a smooth interior, here I add a shell which is just outside and it has just a little more energy. And therefore, for every state which has a smooth interior, here's a state which has a firewall, and therefore there are as many firewalls as there are states with smooth interiors. Let me make this paradox more precise in terms of CFT correlators. This is the essence of the paradox. So the way to make it more precise is as follows. Now take the CFT state, equilibrium state psi, and excite it with this kind of an operator. This is a number operator. So you take one of these A modes, multiply it with its conjugate, and smear it a little bit, but not too much. So you smear it, you integrate it with some peaked function, f of omega, which is peaked about some frequency omega. So this gives you a wave packet that creates a mode about, it measures the number of particles around some given frequency, which is controlled by where f is peak. So you take this state psi and you activate with this number operator. Okay? This number operator increases the energy by only a very small amount because it's a number operator. So it almost commutes with the Hamiltonian. And then you measure a particular correlation function. Okay? So you measure a particular correlation function which involves taking this field phi and integrating it along the Fourier transforms of these functions there. Okay, so it's a particular correlation function. And what happens is the following. You can compute now the change in energy of the state under the action of this number operator. And you find that the change in energy looks like there's this theta. It's actually quadratic in the perturbation, and that's because when the perturbation is positive and negative, you get the same change in energy. So it goes like theta squared into delta omega squared, where delta omega is the width of f in frequency space into some factor of the temperature. It's a simple CFT computation. You can also compute the change in g under this perturbation, and you find that g changes by theta without this factor of delta omega. Okay. So you see that this correlator changes by some factor which is much larger than the change in frequency. And the reason that's a problem, by the way, this is all related to the shell. It's just a precise way of making the shell precise. This number operator kind of creates the shell, and this is something that measures the shell. The reason this is a problem is as follows. You see this unitary maps the Hilbert space at energy E to a Hilbert space at energy E plus delta E. But these two Hilbert spaces have dimensions which are almost the same. And the ratio of these dimensions is very close to 1. Therefore, if you take some typical state in the bigger Hilbert space, it can be written in terms of some excitation of a state in the smaller Hilbert space plus some orthogonal vector, and then using some general properties of operators, you can argue that the difference between the expectation value of any operator G in a typical state in the bigger Hilbert space and an excitation of the smaller Hilbert space has to be small. Okay? But you know that taking a typical state in the slightly bigger Hilbert space is almost the same as taking a typical state in the original Hilbert space. Therefore, you can in fact argue that the change in G under any unitary which doesn't which doesn't increase the energy too much has to be suppressed by the square root of the energy itself. Okay? So the bottom line is that if you take if you have a unitary that increases the energy by delta E, then the maximum it can change any correlator G is by some factor which is the square root of the change in the energy it causes into some largest eigenvalue of G. Okay? And this is just a statement, I don't have time, but it's very easy to show the statement. It's a general statement in statistical mechanics about excitations of thermal systems. And there's a slogan, so as I said, for this, if you have a bounded operator, you expect that the change in G is proportional to the square root of the energy, which is what I said. But here you find, the change in G is proportional to theta. And there's a slogan that goes along with this. The slogan that goes along with this is that, in general, if you take a typical thermal state, like the state in this room, which has a large number of degrees of freedom, it's a fact in statistical mechanics that you cannot definitively excite the state with energy less than kT. That's the statement that if I want to create an excitation in this room, I need energy more than kT. Now I can't, if I just have energy kT, I can't actually create a definitive excitation in this room because it would be swamped out by the thermal fluctuations. But if typical states are smooth, then black holes have the property that you can create very low energy excitations that are definitely detectable. Okay? So this is the slogan that goes along with the latest paradox. It's a way of rephrasing what I said about the shell. It's a more precise way of rephrasing what I said about the shell, which is that if typical black holes are smooth, then they have this funny property which usual systems in statistical mechanics don't. Okay, so I must say I don't have a complete resolution to this, but I'm going to describe a slightly speculative idea in the last few minutes, which I think resolves this. It's a speculative idea, so feel free to criticize. The speculative idea is that one thing you could impose that would resolve this problem is what's called causal patch complementarity. What causal patch complementarity says, and I must say it's not an idea I like very much, but it does resolve the problems. Let me mention it. Is as follows. Let's say you have these operators in the CFT, this whatever purple observer and the green observer, and the purple observer jumps in and falls into the singularity at this point. The green observer jumps in later and falls into the singularity at this point. There are causal patches that correspond to these two observers, which correspond to all possible events that could have influenced the world line of the purple observer and the green observer. So this light cone here indicates the causal patch of the green observer, and this the causal patch of the purple observer. And I'm going to claim that if you try to reconstruct EDS-CFT only in the given causal patch and not globally, then you get rid of this problem. And there's some precise way you can modify our construction to do that. The way you modify a construction is basically not by looking at modes of the bulk operators, but by looking at modes that are restricted to the intersection intersection of a causal patch with the boundary. Okay, so you have to look at an interval on the boundary and only look at modes which have support in that interval, and then you restrict the infalling observer to measure products of these modes. So the difference with the previous setup is that I don't allow the infalling observer to measure arbitrary intervals on the boundary, but intervals that correspond to the intersection of a causal patch with the boundary, and then I reconstruct the physics within that causal patch. Now the first statement that you get, I'll just tell you what the results you get if you make this restriction. It looks like a simple restriction, but it gives you some interesting results. First of all, if you take equilibrium states and all observers agree on what the bulk looks like. If you have an equilibrium state, then this causal patch description is the same as the old description I had. However, if you have a near equilibrium state, which remember was an excitation of an equilibrium state by some simple unitary, then different observers describe it differently. So in particular, an observer who has a causal patch which has an intersection I with the boundary, describes it as some kind of excitation of the boundary. An observer who is using different modes, who's living in a different causal patch, describes it as a different kind of excitation of the boundary. So because observers who live in different patches are using different degrees of freedom, which have support on different regions of space, they describe it as different kinds of excitations. Okay? And then corresponding to this, you can define these mirror operators by using the same formula I had previously. So what do you get? What you find is, let's say you go back to the state I described, which was, oh, I know I have this minus psi d psi, sorry. It should just be e to the I and theta psi. Please ignore this part. I don't know why this part is appeared. So let's say you go back to the state e to the I, theta, and psi, where n was this operator that I mentioned. And now, earlier I wasn't interested in the support of f in position space, but now let me also look at the support. Let me also restrict f to support in some compact region in position space. And then you can ask, if you use this description, what is the physics that you get for an observer who's jumping in very early, and an observer who's jumping in late, who's jumping in at time t? And you find, and I'm just telling you what the result is, you find that an early observer jumps in at very early times, because he doesn't even know about these modes that have support from minus t to t, because he's jumping in at a time which is much smaller than minus t. He doesn't even see the excitation. He basically thinks that this is an exactly equilibrium state. Okay? And so he just sees that this is an equilibrium state and he falls through smoothly and ends his life without seeing anything special. There's some late observer who's using modes which do have support in this interval. And this observer knows that the state is slightly outside, is slightly out of equilibrium. But if you see the way the causal patch works, this observer basically can't go deep enough to see the particle. Okay? So the way the causal patch works is that you have this singularity which is curved, and some observer who jumps in from this point, can only go to some finite region in U. Okay? And you can check, it's a fact that the excitation that this kind of operator creates is beyond, this is the horizon, and the excitation that this creates is here. The particle is here. So the particle is too deep. The particle, the shell that this excitation creates, is too deep for the infalling observer to see, for the late observer. And these two descriptions are complementary. And really what is happening is you have these two observers, one jumping in early and one jumping in late. The late observer knows there's some excitation in the boundary, and he thinks that this excitation has been on the horizon for a long time, but the late observer doesn't see it. So the late observer and the early observer disagree on what happens here, but that's okay because they can't actually communicate with each other. This observer sees that there's a smooth horizon and jumps through. This observer sees that there was some excitation that's here, and he thinks that the late observer should have died, but the late observer doesn't die, goes through smoothly. And so really what this causal patch does is it cuts off these low energy excitations that live near the horizon, and it's like adding a cutoff to the theory, which restricts what are the kinds of modes that you can reconstruct in the bulk. So really what this causal patch complementarity does is it gives you a cutoff and tells you that there are some modes which you can safely exclude because you wouldn't see them unless you went outside your causal patch. So as I said, this is a speculative idea. I don't have any strong evidence for this, but if you were to introduce this as a postulate, it could resolve this paradox. Okay, so I'm almost done. Let me just mention one or two things. One or two other possibilities for resolving this issue of low energy excitations. One possibility, of course, is the possibility that there are generic black holes don't have smooth horizons. So it's possible that only black holes which were formed from collapse have smooth horizons, and black holes which are generic black holes have firewalls. So that's a possibility, which is in fact what the firewall people would like to propose. And notice that typical microstates are not black holes that were formed from collapse, because typical microstates are in equilibrium for an exponentially long time, both in the past and the future, which is different from a black hole that's formed from collapse. So black holes that are formed from collapse are a special set of microstates, and maybe only those microstates are smooth and other microstates have firewalls. Of course, as I said, this is an unattractive possibility because it implies complete breakdown of effective field theory, and it also requires you to give up the duality between the thermofield double and the eternal black hole. This has indeed been suggested by some set of people in 2012, but it's unattractive for this reason. Of course, there's a more interesting possibility, which is what I thought of, which is something that's in fact the most attractive possibility, but I don't know how to make it work. And it's the following recognition. It's a recognition that if you try to add these shells, or you try to act with some late operator, in fact, this state is not formed from any smooth initial data. And that's because if you trace this state back in the past, it gets boosted, gets blue shifted, and has a huge ultra-Planckian collision with whatever formed the black hole in the past. And therefore, this state has singularities in its past initial data. And so it may be that gravitational back reaction is important when you try to measure some correlator here, because there's something very bad that happened in the past. And so maybe rather than just postulating that these excitations don't exist, which is what effectively you do when you impose this causal patch complementarity, you just exclude these excitations from your Hilbert space, and you say that's okay because you can't observe them without going outside the causal patch. Maybe there's some more dynamical reason that these low energy excitations don't exist or get smoothed out. But that being said, I've tried very hard for a long time to try and understand this dynamical reason, and we don't have any answer. But it would be, of course, the nicest description, nicest answer to all of this. Okay, so I think I'm done. Let me just summarize very quickly what I said today. So I started off by giving you the spin chain toy model to resolve the paradoxes I showed you yesterday. And I showed you how, by using these linear equations, you could write down operators which depended on the state, which describe the correct degrees of freedom for the infalling observer. I showed you how you could generalize this for ADS-CFT, and how this resolves all these aspects of the modern information paradox that I showed you yesterday. It also gives you some new things, gives you a description of ER equals EPR, and I tried to give you some semi-classical motivation for why this state dependence occurs, and it has to do with an unusual classical limit of ADS-CFT, because the states in the CFT that correspond to classical states in the bulk have these unusual properties of the inner product. But of course, not all puzzles have been solved. There's this more recent puzzle that has to do with very low energy excitations near the black hole horizon. And there's some ideas I suggested for how to resolve it, including this idea of causal patch complementarity. But I don't know if that's the final word. And there's certainly much more to be done here. Okay, so I'll stop here.
Okay, so anyway, we are going out of time, so let's start again.
I have a quick announcement. So it's the last day, and we are trying to arrange for the traffic. Well,